Good evening. Today's daf is daf Chav Zayin. We're going to begin at the beginning of the Amud, Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, by the Mishnah. Zog the Mishnah, Amevi get, when the Shliach brings a get to be Megarish the wife, V'avad Himenu, and now either the Shliach or the husband, here we're talking about that he's bringing B'shlichus of the husband. So the shliach now brings the get, and v'ovad himenu, and he lost the get. So what does he do? So the Mishnah says like this: Matzol la'alter. If he finds the get right away, then it's kosher. Like Rashi says, and v'im lav. If not, if he finds it afterwards, then it's puzzle. So Rashi, why? Shema ma'acher nafal ve'ein zeh shalai. We're worried that if he finds a get with the same name as him and the same name as his wife, and we're worried that perhaps he found the get later and maybe this is not his get. And we know the Torah says the get has to be written lishma. Now, so very good question. The Gemara is going to ask this and bring, I think, 5 or 6 different opinions. Okay, ve'im lav, if not puzzle. Okay, now, mitzo, if the shliach of the get now finds it after a while, but the deal is that the get is in either an achafisa or oi bide luskema, which is different types of kalim. The Gemara is going to explain what that is. So if he finds the get in these kalim, even if he found it later on, but there's like a siman that the get is his, so then as well, even if it's lachar zman, he can use this get. Now, in Makire, like Rashi says, it has to read, like Rashi says, Milsa Ba'anpe Nafshe, it's a new thing, and you have to read it as Oi, which means Oi in Makire, or let's say the Shliach recognizes that this is his get, so the din is kosher. So, just a sikkim of the Mishnah, a very simple din. If a Shliach brings the get and he loses the get, so if he finds the get right away, so then it's kosher. If not, then it's puzzle because we're worried that perhaps the get that he found is somebody else's get. If he found the get, even lachar zman, in these different types of kalim, or he recognizes that this is taka the get, his get, so then the husband could use this as a get. Kosher, it's kosher. Okay, so now, the Gemara asks on our Mishnah, the Mishnah says that if he found it after zman meruba, he found it after a long time, so our Mishnah says clearly that it's possible. So now the Gemara asks, Uramino, I'm going to ask you a stira from our Mishnah to the Mishnah of Baba Metzia. This Mishnah is found on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah says as follows: Matzah, if one of the shtaris were found, either Gittin Daf, if let's say somebody found a get of a woman, B'shichrurei avadim, or a shtar shichr, a get which is a document that allows the eved to go free. Or, in the case of Diya Seiki is when a Shchimera is about to die and he writes a tzava. So, and now they found this Diya Seiki. Diya Seiki is a lashon of the Gemara in Baba Basra, and Rashbam says it's a lashon of da tehei lemekim b'liyos. In other words, over here, this should stand for you, which means this is the ratzon of the Shchimera. So, if somebody found either Gittin Daf Shichrurei Avadim or Diya Seiki, or he found matanos, or he found ashtar, a document of a matana from a healthy person, b'shevrim, or a receipt, in other words, a receipt that a chayiv was paid. So what's the din? The guy finds these different documents. So the Mishnah says over there, he should not return it to, let's say the case of, you should not return not to the person who wrote the shtar, not to the mekabel. So let's take get for example. You should not return the get not to the wife and not to the husband. Let's say the shtar shichr, you should not return it not to the master or not to the eved. Now, why not? Why can he not return it? Shani Eimer, the Mishnah says, because I say, ksuvim hayu, that really, let's say the get was written to give it to the woman, and now he changed his mind. He changed his mind not to give it either to the wife or the shtar shichr, he changed his mind. That's what the Mishnah says in Baba Metzia. So now the Gemara says it's medayik from this Mishnah. Now, dafke, we say that Shani Eimer, that the guy wrote it, and Benimlach Alein, and he changed his mind. So the Mishnah says, so the Gemara is medayik from that Mishnah, Ha Omar Tnu, if let's say the husband would have said, give this get to my wife. In other words, he says, this is a get, yeah, I took it, it fell from me, I didn't see it for a while, but now give the get. Would be mashma from that Mishnah, that Nastan, that the husband can give this get and use it as a divorce. Even if he gives it a lot longer after the get fell from him. So the chayra, it's a stira. Our Mishnah says that matzah hamevi get, and if you found it later on, so then it's puzzle. What's this Mishnah says? The Mishnah says that if you found these different types of documents, why can you not return it? Because I say that the guy wrote it and he changed his mind. But what's mashma from this Mishnah? If the guy would have said clearly, give this get to my wife, then it would have been good, even after a long time. So Amar Rabba says, so it's a stira. So Amar Rabba says, it's not a stira. Loi kasha, it's not a question. The two Mishnayos are talking about two different scenarios. One Mishnah is talking about when you have caravans that are frequent between the places, and one Mishnah is talking about which you do not have caravans going between each other. So, which means the Mishnah which speaks about that when you lose the get, when, like our Mishnah says, that I maybe get and you lost it, so that's talking about, and you found it, let's say later on, that's talking about a place where they have a lot of travel, there's a lot of traffic in that area, and we're worried that after time, if let's say this husband found this get that even though it has his name and it has her name on it, because there's so much traffic going on in those cities, we're worried that perhaps this is not his get. Now, the Mishnah which says that it's mashma that even after a long time, as Zman Meruba, he could use the get, like the Mishnah Bava Metzia, that's talking about a case that there's not a lot of travel, there's not a lot of traffic in that area, and therefore even after Zman Meruba, we're not worried that the get that fell from him is coming from other people. And therefore, if the husband says Tnu li'isha, and she should be megarish, the halacha is that it works. So it's not a stira. Now the Gemara comments on Rabbah and says that when Rabbah says this distinction, even in a place where there's a lot of travel, and I'm worried that the get that this person found, he lost the get, and then he found the get 2 days later, so I'm worried that it's perhaps somebody else's get. So the Gemara, Rabbah wanted to say that it's in a place of Mokim Shashayaris Mitzuyis. So the Gemara, even in a place of Mokim Shashayaris Mitzuyis, there has to be a chazaka. In other words, there has to be known that there's two people by the name of Yosef ben Shimon. For example, that when we know, for example, in the city, that there's two people by the name of Shimon ben Yosef ben Shimon, and there's two people, whoever Yosef and Shimon's wife's name are the same names, then we have a chash that perhaps this get that he found is really somebody else's get. But if, let's say, there's no chazaka that there's two people with the same name, side the husband and side of the wife, so then we don't have a chash that perhaps it's somebody else, even if it's in a place which has a lot of travel. So that's a big chiddush. Rabbah wanted to say that there's a difference if you have a lot of travel or not a lot of travel. So the Gemara, even in a place that's a lot of traffic and a lot of travel, there has to be mamish, a chazaka in this town that the guy, his wife, and there's another guy with the same name, and his wife have the same exact name. Now the Gemara says, if you're not going to say, rather you're going to say that we have a chash for that there's a get, even that this is somebody else's get, even when you don't have two names the same. So then the Gemara says, Kasha de Rabba de Rabba. You're going to have a stira between one din the Rabba said and another din the Rabba said. Now, what's the case? So the Gemara says, Tahi gita d'ishtakach beidina de Rav Huna. There was a get that was lost, and it was found in the Beis Din of Rav Huna. Now, what happened was this get was verified, the chesimus were verified, it's a kosher get, and the guy comes to Rav Huna's Beis Din and says, this is my get. So what happened? We have Eksiv Bey, and that get of this person that claims in Rav Huna's base and it's his get. What was written? It was written in the city of Shviri, which was in Masa da Rochis Nahara, which is in a city. It's in the city of Shviri, which is on like the banks of the river of Rochis. Okay, now. So that's what it says in the get, and this guy's claiming that this is my get. Rav Huna says that even though in this get had his name, had his wife's name, had all the details, and it says Tak in the city of where he comes from, Rav Huna Paskin Choishish in l'shnei Shviri. I'm worried that there's two names by the name of Shviri, and maybe somebody else who happens to have the same name as you and the same name as your wife, who all lives in a different city of Shviri. Also, maybe he's divorcing his wife, and maybe it fell from him. And the get that you're providing, or the get that you're saying that occurred, that's in our base, then is not really your get. So therefore, what did Rav Huna paskin? That you do not return the get to him. Okay. So now, Rav Chisda tells, again, so this was the Maisa. This came, and Rav Huna says, Choshen l'shnei Shviri. Now, so now Rav Chisda tells Rabbo, his friend, who they were both Talmidim of. Rav Chisda and Rabbo were both students of Rav Huna. So Rav Chisda tells the Rabbo, Poik ba'ayin ba, go check this halacha. Why? Because tonight in the evening Rav Huna is going to inquire from you what you hold. Do you think that the din is correct or not? In other words, when you have a get, when you have a document that has two shvidis, are we word or not? So what happened? Nafek, Dok, Va'ashkech. So Rabbi went out and he was medayik from a Mishnah as follows. This is a Mishnah in Bava Metzia, and the Mishnah says, Mishnah Bava Metzia, Daf Chof, Amud Aleph, and the Mishnah says, Kol Maisa Bezdin. Anytime you have a Maisa Bezdin, the halacha is Harei Ze Yachzer, you could return it. What does that mean? When you find a shtar which was made in Bezdin, for example, if you have a shtar choiv, you have a document that somebody owes money. It's called a shtar choiv, and it has a kiyum in Bezdin. It's verified in Bezdin, which means the Bezdin took the shtar choiv and they made it ishur. They said that this is a legit shtar choiv in Bezdin, and it's not mezuyif. It's not forged. So the halacha is you're allowed to. You found this shtar choiv in Bezdin. It was mekuyim in Bezdin. So the din is, it said, let's say the shtar choiv, it said the malva and the leiva, which means it said, let's say, Ruvain lent to Shimon money. So Ruvain is, let's say, the malva, and then there's a leiva. So the din is, the Mishnah says over there that you could return it to the owner of the shtar, to the malva. Why? Because we say that since it was mekuyim in Bezdin, we're not worried that he wrote it and he changed his mind not to lend him the money. Okay, that's the din. So the din is, again, that kol ma'aseh bezdin harei ze yachzer. Anytime it's ma'aseh bezdin, you can return. Now, what do you see from this din? From here, Rabbi wants to say that we're not, just from this Mishnah, we see that we're not worried about shnei shviri. Why? Because if we were worried about the two cities of shviris, even if he found a shtar which has ma'aseh bezdin, let's be worried that this malva is not really the malva, it's somebody else. So how do I know? Let's say Reuven, you have Reuven A and Reuven B. How do I know that this Reuven A is really the Baal shtar? And if he has a shtar, now he can go and start collecting the money. So from the fact that I see Kol Ma'aseh Bezdin, whenever you have Ma'aseh Bezdin, the din is Yachzer, you could bring it back to the malva. So l'cheira, the same thing over here. When you have a get that was verified in Bezdin, and it says Shviri, I'm not worried about that perhaps is another shviri, because whenever you have ma'aseh bezdin, there's a yachzer. So l'cheira, the get should be able to go back to this guy who came to Rav Huna. So what's the maskana over here? The maskana is that he argues with his Rav. He doesn't paskin right. Rav Huna paskin something. It's mashma that he brings a raya against him. Okay, interesting. Fine. Okay, so now we have like this. So that's one story. Now the Gemara, remember we said that you have to say there's a difference between if in the case of Shayaris, So he said that even in the case of Shayaris, it has to be that there has to be a chazaka of Shnei Yosef and Shimon bir Achas. And the Gemara says, if not, then there's going to be a Maisa list there, there's going to be stories in that the rabbi that contradicts himself. Okay, so that's story number one. Then the Gemara says, in the Beis Din of Rav Huna. Now, in the Beis Din of Rav Huna, it was the Chemachim Shashayaris Mitzuyis Dami. It was a place that they had a lot of traffic there. There was a lot of caravans, and people used to ask a lot of shilas over there, and people used to come Pashit to get Torah over there. And the Pashit, and nevertheless, Rabba Paskind there's a similar story in his Beis Din, which they had a lot of traffic over there, and Rav Huna Paskind that Yachzer, you have to return the get. Now, the question is, why was he not choishish for Shnei Shviri, just like he was choishish in the Mishnah? In the case of Shayaras Mitzuyes, that maybe the get is somewhere else. So Alma, what do we see? You must say the fact that in the first Mishnah, what does he say? That we are Yachzer, and then over here, there's another story that he says V'kapashit Yachzer, and Rabba says that to return it. L'cheira, why is he not choishish for Shviri? So he says, Alma, what do you see from here? That if there's a chazaka, that there's two Yosef and Shimons in one city then we're choishish that the get is somebody else's. But if there's no chazaka, that there's two Yosef and Shimons, then there's no chashash. And therefore, Rabbah said that we're not choishish when there's two shviri unless there's a chazaka in that city because you don't have a chazaka about these two cities. In other words, so when you have a chazaka that there's two shviris, right? Let's say, for example, when there's a chazaka that you have two Yosef ben Shimon, so then I say achshash. But over here, what are you going to say? Maybe there's another city shviri. There's no other city shviri. So just like we only say that even when there's shayaris, mitzuyis, only when there's a chazaka of two names, so too I'm going to say the same thing by the two cities. Okay. Now the Gemara relates Ovad Rabba Uvda, which means Rabba did a ma'isa. In other words, he paskin the halacha that bahi gita d'ishtakach beikisna. He says there was a certain get that was found in the flax house in Pumbedisa. There was a get that was found in the flax house of Pumbedisa, and what did Rabba paskin? That you should return the get to the husband, kishmaitze, as the halacha. In other words, that we do not have a chash when you have two people with the same names, only with two tanaim. So one of the two tanaim that you have, number one is that it has to be a lot of traffic, and it has to have a chazaka that these two men these two men share the same name. And in this story, you were missing one of the tanaim. So that's the story of Rabba Uvda. He paskin that in the get that was found in the flax and Pumbedisa, he paskin that you return the get, because again, simply put it, is because you don't have the two tanaim. Again, the two tanaim is either that they have, number one is that it has to be shayaris mitzuyis, it has to be that there's a lot of traffic, and number two, you have to have the same names. If you're missing one of those two tanaim, then it doesn't work. Now, the Gemara brings the Maisa, exactly, we said there was a Maisa in Beit Kisna, which means there's a Maisa in the flax house. So the Gemara says, Igad Amri, some people say that when we say, what does it mean Beit Kisna? It means Beduchta Heicha the Taru Kisna, in a place that they had, there was flax. In other words, that it was a place where people soak flax, and Rafagav the Huchsuku, so which means a place that soak flax, which means that there's not a lot of people over there. So Va'afagav the Huchsuku, even though in that city there was two people with the same names, nevertheless, Rabbi Paskin to give him back the get. Why? Because you don't have a lot of traffic over there. So we see that even though there was, in this town, there was two people with the same name, so how do you know that the get you're giving back is to number one? Maybe it's number two. So he paskined that the guy who claimed that it's his get, he gave it back to him. Why? Because there was not a lot of traffic. That's one version, how to learn the story. And that's what it means by Higita Dishtaka Bekisna, that there was people with the same name, but you were lacking Shayaras Mitzuyas. Okay, then Ikada Amri, other people say, a second opinion, Beduchta de Mezabne Kisna. And people say it happened in a place where they sold flax, which means in the market. So in the marketplace, there's a lot of traffic over there. However, but there was not a chazak of two people, but nevertheless, in the market, there's a lot of traffic, and Abba Paskin to give the guy back his get, again, because you're lacking two of the both Tanaim. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this. Reb Zayda, Rami Masnisa Abraisa. Reb Zayda asked a question from our Mishnah on a Braisa. He asked this. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, maybe get v'avadim, if somebody brings a get and he lost the get. So imatzal alter, if he finds it right away, kosher, it's kosher. Vimla, but if not, puzzle. So Reb Zayda asked the Shiloh, Ramina, I'm going to ask you a Shiloh from the Braisa. This is a Tiseftim Bav Metzia, and the Braisa says like this. Matzah get isha bashuk. If somebody found a get of a woman in a shuk, so bisman shahabal meida, when the husband says, agrees, that this get is mine, in other words, that he said to give it to the woman, so then the halach is yachzor the isha, you give the get to the woman. But ein habal meida, if the husband does not agree, so the din is like this: lo yachzor lazeh, lo yachzor lo lazeh, v'lo lazeh. You should not return the get not to the husband, because maybe the husband already gave the get to the wife, and also do not give it to the wife because maybe the husband didn't give the get yet and she's not divorced. So what do? Basically, you keep it in limbo. That's what the Mishnah says.
Who's giving it?
Yeah, you don't give it to anybody. Again, if the husband agrees, so then you give it to the wife. If the husband doesn't agree, so you don't give it to anybody.
So what's he going to do with it?
Oh, so what do you see from here? So now the Gemara says, what do you see from this Braisa? Turn over to Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Bezman Shabal Meidam. Yes. Now, what do you see clearly from this Braisa? That if the husband agrees, admits that he wrote the get, Yachzor the Isha, you return it to the wife. So the Chayra, which is mashma, that afilu, even if you found the get, lizman meruba, after a long time, after he lost the get. So what do we see from here? That after he lost it, and it's a long period of time, if he says to give it, then we're not worried that it's somebody else's get. So the Chayra we see, so we see mamish that this Braisa, so this is what Reb Zera asked. Reb Zera asked, the Chayra, we asked before that it's a stira from our Mishnah to Mishnah Baba Metzia. He's asking this from a Mishnah on to a Braisa. That our Mishnah says that if it's a long time, it's puzzle. If he found, and here it says clearly that Matzah get Isha Bashuk. So if the husband agrees, so we give it back to her, even after a long time. So the Mishani Reb Zera answers and says, Kam b'makom sha'ashayaros mitzuyis, and Kam b'makom she'en hashayaros mitzuyis. He said, the Mishnah says that when you lose the get, it's talking about that there's a lot of traffic, and we're worried that the get that you found may be somebody else's get. So therefore, don't give it back to him unless it's found right away. The Braisa says that that you do give it back is talking about shayaros mitzuyis, and therefore we're not worried that it's somebody else's get. That's one way. Now, the Gemara brings another ikadamri. Other people say that even in a place that there's shayaros mitzuyis v'hu, as long as in this city you have Yosef and Shimon, hu d'lei hadar. In other words, you don't give the get back to the woman only in a place that, number one, there's a lot of traffic, and also there's a chazaka that there's two men that have the same name, and therefore we're worried that perhaps this is somebody else's get. V'hainu de Rabba. So it comes out that Reb Zera is mamish like the halacha of Rabba, that we're not choishish for a get only if you have these two tanaim. Number one, it has to be shayaros mitzuyis, and it has to be a chazaka that you have in this city the same two names. Okay, and that's one way to learn it. Other people say that Reb Zera afagav d'lo yuchsuku, that shitas Reb Zera is that even if there's no chazaka, that there's two Yosef and Shimons, lo lahader, you should not return the get. In other words, that we're choishish for the get, even, why? Because there is shayaros mitzuyis. And then it comes out from here that Reb Zera has his own opinion, upligi de Rabba, and he argues on it, and Reb Zera argues on Rabba. Why? Because Rabba said clearly that you need to have two tanaim. Comes out from here, from this whole story, that you only need one. Now, the Gemara says that Rabba and Reb Zera, they asked their questions. One asked, the theme of their questions, Reb Zera's question and Rabba's question, was the same thing. Now, Rabba asked basically a stira from a Mishnah to a Mishnah. Our Mishnah in Gittin says one thing, and Bava Metzia Yudches says something else. Comes along Reb Zera and asks the same question, but he spins it from a Mishnah and a Brisa. So now the Gemara says this. Bishleima de Rabba le'omer kereb Zeda meile. Rabba did not ask on Rab Zeda. He asked from a Mishnah to a Mishnah because he says, I'm Mishnah alima le'lak shiyeh. It's if you have a choice to ask from a Mishnah on a Brisa, obviously you're going to ask on a Mishnah. Mishnah is much stronger. The Mishnah is Ikar Halacha. This is what Rabbeinu HaKadosh set up. Sometimes we know a Brisa is Ein Ikar Halacha. So when you have a question on a Mishnah to a Brisa or a Mishnah to a Mishnah, it's much stronger when you ask from a Mishnah to a Mishnah. So the Gemara says, Elo, Reb Zeda, but according to Reb Zeda, my time why wouldn't Reb Zeda use, you have a Befedish Mishnah, and you're asking the same thing, why wouldn't you just ask it on a Mishnah? So Amar Lach, Reb Zeda will tell you that I can tell you that really the Mishnah Bava Metzia is very different. Why? Because Ki Ktani, because you could say that, again, Ki Ktani, did we learn Befedish Im Omar Tnu Neistan Afilas Mamaruba? The Mishnah didn't say that you can give it even after Zman Maruba. And I can tell you, Dilma, maybe the Kavanah of the Mishnah is that Im Omar Tnu. If a person says Tnu, then Neisnim Kedekaim Malon La'alter. That when the person says, I can tie up that the Mishnah Bava Metzia means that when you say Tnu, and you have to give it right away, but not a long time. Maybe if you, after a long time, maybe we are chayshish. So therefore, Reb Zeda can tell you the Mishnah is not clear. You're being medayik and saying that it's mashma. If you would say tnu, even la'alter, you can say no, that tnu only works la'alter. So therefore, I'm not going to ask a shaila on the Mishnah. I'm going to ask a shaila b'feish on a brisa. Okay, so now Rabbi Yirmiyah, we're going to bring a Rabbi Yirmiyah. He's going to explain he's going to bring the question. He's going to say this. Rabbi Yirmiyah says this. Don't ask not on the Mishnah, not on the Brisa, because I can tell you that the Mishnah and the Brisa were matter even to give after a long time. It's talking about going to Ka'amri Edim, because the Edim who are, I can tell you that the Edim that are signed on the bottom said, I'll get that you have, I can tell you that we're talking about a case that they said clearly that we only ever signed on the get, on one get, with the name of Yosef ben Shimon. So therefore, to say a chash about somebody else, there's no problem. So the Gemara says, Ihachi, if that's really the case,
more Edom with the same names.
huh?
There can be other Edom with the same names.
Could be. Yes, that's a good question.
So this whole thing is very far-fetched. Okay, so the Gemara says,
Far-fetched, go all the way.
exactly. So the Gemara says, Ihachi, if so, ma lememra. What's the chiddush over here? What's the Mishnah? If the Bryce is telling me, if you're telling me that here we're talking about a case where the Edom said clearly that we only signed ever in our life these two Edom on a get of Yosef ben Shimon, so what's the chiddush? Obviously, there's no chash that maybe there's another get. So the Gemara says, Ma'al Detema, you would think that, I would think, Leichosh, Dilma, Isrimi, Shma, Kishma, Ve'edim, Ke'edim, Ko. I would say that one should be concerned that perhaps it happened that another get was written in which the names of the husband and the wife are identical to the names of the husband and the wife of the second. And, now take this, and the names of the witness are identical to the names of the witness.
That's what he said. That's exactly.
So that's the Gemara says. Kamash Malan, then I don't say that. Okay, so now that's one answer. Rabashi says that the Mishnah Bava Metzia and the Brisa were matter to give the get back after Zman Maruba is talking about going to Omar, which the person who's claiming the get says, Nekav yesh boy b'tzad oisapon. You should know there's a hole in the get that I lost on the side, and a taka found, so he's giving a very clear, distinct raya that it's his get. To have a lay, siman muvak, so now that's a very, very, it's a clear sign, it's a distinguished mark.
It's a definite identifiable mark.
It's an identifiable mark, exactly. To have a lay, siman muvak. That's what Rashi says. Again, Kagoy nekav yeshba b'tzad ois plainis, to have a lay, siman muvak. So the Gemara says, v'dafke b'tzad ois plainis. And dafke, when Rashi permits that you can return the get, specifically when a person says the hole is next to such and such letter, they have a simon muvak, which is a clear-cut, distinguished mark. Aval nekav ba'ama, just saying, oh, by the way, you should know that this get that I have as a whole, he doesn't mention the precise location, so then you're not allowed to return it. Now, Why not? Ki misapkele, because Rav Ashi had a suffix bechlal if simanim, if simanim bechlal that you could return with simanim, I deiraisa, is it deiraisa? In other words, does a siman work deiraisa? So therefore, if a siman works deiraisa, you could be soimich in regards to the isser of Eishes Ish to be machzer with these simanim. Or is the Rabbanan, or maybe the Chachamim said that a siman only works for Hashavas Aveda midrabanan, but really minatera you cannot return it unless you have edim. So therefore, l'chayda you cannot be seimech on this legabe a get, and the only reason why the Chachamim instituted this is for money, but not in regards to Isser. In other words, in regards to Isser, the Chacham don't have the ability to be oiker and say minatera simanim don't work. So if minatera simanim don't work, so then it's a problem if I could use this get or not. So since it's a suffix, Rav Ashi says you cannot be matat get mitzad a suffix, only with a siman muvak. That helps me in hatera. Okay, now the Gemara brings the Nacham Meisim. Give me a cup of water. Okay, so now the Gemara says like this: Rabba bar Barchana irkas legita be midrasha. Rabba bar Barchana lost his get. He was a shliach leilacha, and he lost his get when he was in the base medrash. Now, so Amar, he said, I simona. He said like this: if they request a distinguished sign, isli begavei. So I have one for it. I tfius, if it depends on like a visual recognition, a tfius ayin, then eina isli begavei. Then I have a method to recognize it. Adru nahale, so they returned this get to him. Omar, he said afterwards, lo yadani mishum simona adrua. I don't know if they returned it to me because of simanim, a distinguished mark that I supplied. Thank you very much.
Amen.
So he says, I don't know ibitvius. So he says this: if I have itvius, any isle begave. I don't know if they returned it to me because of the siman that I gave, and therefore simanim are going to hold because savri, and they hold simanim's deiraisa, or mishum tvias eina, or they returned it to me because of tvias eina, and therefore it would come out v'dafke tzur b'menabon dafke if you're a talmid chacham like me who relied upon when they say that they have a sign, then it's good. But a regular person, then it won't work. Okay, then we said like this: v'im lav. The Mishnah said, so im mitzol la'alter is kosher. V'im lav pasul. So Mati, you asked in the beginning of this year, what does it mean la'alter? So now we're going to learn a bunch of shittas. We learned in a brayse ezeu shlei la'alter. What is considered immediately? So like this: Rav Nassan Omar, first shittas Rav Nassan says sheshah kadei sheta'avar sheyarav v'tishta is when there is a delay, which is equivalent to the amount of time it would take for a caravan to pass by and camp there. He says that the time is long that it will be for a person that stands and sees that there's no other person passing there. That nobody is there. Rabbi Omer Kedei Lichtiv Get the time it takes to write a get. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Kedei Lekreisi the time it takes to read the get. Acher Omer Kedei Lekreis Velikreisi time it takes to write and to read the get. Okay, so the Gemara adds like this: Va'afilu shah, and even if you waited and you found the get Zman Meruba after v'yesh by simanim midin alav, and you have simanim, so then you could be made to use for these simanim that it's not somebody else's get. So the Gemara says, the Amri, what's that case? You said nekev yesh b'tzad eisaplenis. You said that there is a hole next to such a letter. And he says that the Bryson continues. What does that mean? The Amri Oretz v'goitz that you said you gave it says literally means that one may not testify with regard to the distinguished marks of the physical description, where they said that the get is long or short. In other words, they didn't give like distinguished marks. Then the Brisa continues and says, "Mitzo, if the get was found, mitzo kosher bekis, if the get was found tied up in a pouch, barnoki b'tabas, or in a purse or a ring, and he recognizes the documents, Chav Ches Amid Aleph, Oy Shematzo ben Caleb, or he found it amongst the utensils in his house. I feel his mamruba even after a long time, then kosher, it's kosher. Okay, so now we're going to bring a machlekes amiroim how to pass on the halacha. What does it mean the altar? Itmar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel halacha. The halacha is like the yesh emdim shleisha adam sham. Rabbi Baruch Hana Amar in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shmuel, the halacha is like Shimon Lazar shleover adam sham. So the Gemara says, Leim Amar halacha kamar, Umar halacha kamar. Why did the Amoraim, why were they like Marich in the Lashonis and say Shloisham, Shloiversham? Why don't they just say the halacha is the Kiyesh Emrim? And Yitzchak says the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Elazar. So the Gemara answers and says Mishum, because the Abchuluhu, because there are those who reverse the opinions of the Tanaim. They needed to state the opinions explicitly so there would be no mistake in regards to the halacha. Then the Gemara says Mitzvah b'chafisa oy be de lo yiskoima. So the Mishnah said, "Imakire kosher." So the Gemara says, "My chafisa, Amar Archana, chemes ktana." This is a small flask, and my deluskuma tlisa desavi, which means a purse of the elderly. That's what it means. Okay, let's do a quick chazara. All right, so we started off on Daf Chozayin Amar Aleph. The Mishnah said that when you bring a get, if a shliach brings a get and he loses the get. So if he finds it right away, which we brought many shittas, what does it mean la'alta? Then it's kosher. If not, then it is pasul. And we said if he even after he finds the get after a while, but if it's in a chafisa or like this type of flask or type of keli, or he recognizes the get, it's kosher. So the Gemara says, I'm going to ask you a shaila from a Mishnah Bava Metzia. The Mishnah Bava Metzia Daf Yud Ches said that if you found Gittin Nashim Shichra Avodim or Daitiki or Matanes V'Shevrim, so the din is Harei Zeh Lo Yachzer. So what do you see clearly from the Mishnah? That if you find Gittin Nashim, you're not allowed to return it. Why? Because they say that perhaps he wrote the get and then he changed his mind. Now, which is mashma, if he would have said clearly Tenu, Neistan, even after his Mameruba. So the we see that after his Mameruba, a get is kosher. So Rabbi said it's not a question. Our Mishnah which says that it's pasul is talking about b'makom shashayaris mitzuyis, and the Mishnah Bava Metzia is talking about b'makom she'enashayaris mitzuyis. And the Gemara asks, even in the place of b'makom shashayaris mitzuyis, is dafka if that it's pasul is dafka you don't give the get back. If there's a chazaka that there's two Yosef and Shimons in that city. Now, if you're not going to say that, then you need to have these two Tanaim. Then Rabbah is going to be a question. Why? Because there's one story that in Rab Huna's get, based on they found the get. And in this get, they wrote that it took place in Shviri, in the city of Shviri, which is on the banks of Rokis. Rav Huna says that that you don't give the get back to this person because maybe there's another city of Shviri and somebody else wrote the get. Now, Rav Chizda and Rabbah, who were the Talmidim of Rav Huna, said, go look into this because Rav Huna is going to ask you the shilas tonight. So he looked into it and he said, the Mishnah clearly says in Bava Metzia, that Kol Ma'aseh Bezdin Harei Zeh Yachzer. That anytime there's a Ma'aseh Bezdin, you can return the shtar halva, let's say the shtar choiv, you can return it to the malva. Now, we know Rav Huna, his Bezdin had a lot of traffic, and what did he paskin? That you can return it back to you can return the get. So what do we see from here? That if there's a chazaka that Shnei Yosef and Shimon in one city, then you don't return it. But if not, then you do return. And then the Gemara says that Rabbah paskin in that get, the same thing that was found in a kitna, in Pumbedisa, like that you do return it. So some people say either it was in a place that there was not a lot of people, but there was a chazaka of the two names, or it was in a place a lot of traffic, but there was no chazaka of these two names. So we see that if you don't have these two Tanaim, that it has to be a lot of traffic and the two names, then you can return the get. Now, Reb Zera, he asked the same shaila that Rav Huna asked, but on a Braisa Mishnah. Our Mishnah said, I maybe get matzah alter kosher from lav pasul, and the Mishnah says matzah get isha b'shuk. So when the husband agrees, then you return it. But if not, then you don't give it back to any, which would imply that if the husband says to give it back, even zman meruba, you do give it back. So the cher is a stira. So he answered, it depends. Now, other people say is that one way to learn it is that dafka, you return it. You don't return it if you have both signs. In other words, you have sai sheyaras mitzuyis and the two names, which would be like Rabbah. The second way to learn Reb Zera is that only one Tanai is enough. You don't need to have two. So the Gemara says, Mele Rabba asking a shaila from Mishnah to Mishnah, I understand. But why would Reb Zeir not learn like Rabba to ask from one Mishnah to another Mishnah? So the Gemara says, Reb Zeir tells you, Lav Dafke, the Mishnah Mitzi is a stira, because when we say Tnu, it means Tnu la'alter. Lav Dafke means much later. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah learned, says that Be'emes, the Eidim over here said that they only signed Yosef and Shimon, one get they signed in it. So the Gemara says, what's the Chiddush? The Chiddush is that we don't worry that perhaps that these names are exactly like other names, and the Eidim that are on here are Eidim of other Eidim. We're not worried about that. Rabbi Ashi says, we're talking about that the guy said clearly that there's a hole on the side of a certain letter, which that is considered a siman muvak. Now, dafka when he gives this sign, but if he just says nekav ba'alma, just a regular hole, that will not work. Why? Because b'chlal we have a suffix b'chlal if simanim b'chlal are deiraisa or not. So if you say simanim is deiraisa, so then this deiraisa siman will work that you could use the get to be matre eishes ish. But if not, then if it's only d'rabbanan, then it's a big problem. Rabbi Rachana now lost the get in Beis Medrash, and he said, if they need a sign, begavei, then I have a sign. If they need a tfias ayin, I also have a tfias ayin. So they gave it back to him. But he said, I don't know, did they give it back to me because of the siman, which would mean siman is deiraisa, or maybe they gave it back to me, but tfias ayin, which we know, tfias ayin, like the one Bava Metzia says, only works by a Talmud Chacham. Then the Mishnah said, Vim lav puzzle. So we brought different shittas. What does it mean? Shalela alter. Either Shashah Kadesh Ta'avar Shayara, V'tishta, the time it takes for the caravans to go and rest, or for the time it takes for a person to stand and see, or not to pass. Some people will say Shah Adam Sham. Some people say the time it takes to write a get. And then we said Afilu Shah, and there has simanim. If the guy says that there's a siman in the neck of, then he could rely on it. Okay, then we said, or if he finds Matzo kosher b'kis or b'arniki b'tabas, or he found ben b'kalim or the zman meruba, it's kosher. Then Itmar we said, some people say the halacha is like the Yeshemrim, some people say it's like the other opinion. So the Gemara asks, so why not just say clearly? Why do you have to say? Why don't you just say halacha? Why don't you just say clearly that halacha kamar? Because he says some people mix up the names. Then we said Matzo b'chafisa oy b'dluskoma. So we said what's a chafisa? Chafisa is a chemas ktana, and dluskoma is a tlika. The save is